All right. So, what did we learn on Thursday? How are we feeling about JavaScript in general? Feeling like it's sinking in? We feeling like we're still a little scared of it? We're feeling like maybe we need another project? Maybe we're feeling like we don't know how we feel about it because it's been a couple days? Talk to me. How are we feeling?
So I was working on some overdue assignments and the vocab was definitely vocabbing. I was not okay at certain parts of the day. Like I would put a bracket closing and it would change like everything, or I would forget to put a quote and it throw everything off. But the practice was good and I got some brush up on the vocabulary, so that was good.
Good. And a good reminder for everyone that there is a terms list in Canvas. So if you are someone who is a vocab heavy person, we do have this terms list document with terms loaded up in here. And if there are terms that we are using in class and that are not on this list, feel free to let me know and we'll get this list updated just so everyone can collaborate on it and have that going for them.
You know,
Um,
Max, it was the football play screen that worked for me because it's giving me a formula, but pointing to what is what in the formula is what I needed. Like knowing what the words are really doesn't matter unless you know what they're defining. So looking at the
Absolutely.
formula with the arrows is what clicked for me.
Good. Glad to hear that. That is my personal favorite. Everyone learns a little differently, but I'm glad to see that that is helping you.
Thanks, Max.
Um, Palash, awesome to hear about your first JavaScript 30. That is a great series. I like Wes a lot. Wes Bose or Wes Boss, can't remember, but that is definitely a great resource. I believe that link is just javascript30.com. Maybe I'm wrong about that. No, it is just JavaScript 30. So I will drop that link in there. Sequota, nice to hear you're feeling all right. I think overthinking it is kind of a thing that we want to go back and throughout this project, we'll be going through and adding our comments of like, all right, but why did we do this? What's the order that the computer is running this in? All of that stuff. So it is important to kind of separate out in your mind, hey, is this something where I'm like, I forget how I put it yesterday of the, I'm sorry, on Thursday of the, what are we trying to get it to do? How are we going to get it to do it? And then why is it working the way it is? If you can answer those three questions, I think that that's when you can kind of get out of your own headspace and go, no, I can answer those three questions. I can not only figure out the process of what we did, but why we told the computer, to do it, and then how it's actually doing it. I think that once you get to that level, it's like, yeah, I can do these projects on my own, and that's when you get to that more level of JavaScript knowledge. So good to hear that confidence is building a little bit, that we're not totally afraid of it. And at any point, don't be afraid to interrupt me, whether it is in chat or whether it is coming off mute. This is not just about does it work? This is more about sorry, I realized my microphone was not on the right setting. Probably sound a little bit better now. This is not just about, hey, is my code working? This is, hey, do I understand why we're doing this step? Do I understand, maybe I have a question around the syntax or I don't understand that. We are not doing these projects for my sake. I know how to build all these projects. I can build all of these projects in an hour or two, right? These projects are for you to test your understanding, and don't be afraid to give me pushback when we're working through them. If a question pops into your mind, no matter how stupid you think it is, go ahead and ask that question, because if you have it, chances are another student has it or can learn from the answer. So we're going to dive into our project tonight. Our project is, and I will drop a link to the final version of it in the chat, just if you want to play around with it on your own. It is, you will notice again, a very basic looking interface. I know Doug usually goes back in and kind of spruces up his projects to make them a little bit more portfolio ready. We're focusing solely on the JavaScript here, right? So if you do want to go back through, make this look a little bit nicer, put in a background image, kind of go from there, you totally can. But we're focusing on the JavaScript here. We're going to get to about 400 lines of code, believe it or not, to pull off this interface. And if that is daunting, that's okay. It's going to take us 2 or 3 days to get through all of that, to understand it, to take our breaks. I am going to be pacing it, so you guys are encouraged to code along with me, unless you are finding, hey, you know, I get more understanding if I follow along and I just take notes. That is totally fine. I'm not going to ask you guys to turn this in at the end, but we'll be pacing it so you can follow along. The general idea here is that we build out this little drop down. The drop down is where all of the magic starts. We're going to come in and click on any one of these movies. And when we do, you will see that there is a seating array that shows up in front of the screen. And you can select as many movies or as many seats as you would like. And you'll notice that if you select a seat that's already taken, it won't let you select that. And so you can select your 3 seats. You'll notice that it keeps track of the price of the movie up here, and every movie has a different price. Then down at the bottom, it will show you what seats you have selected, and you can go ahead and hit the checkout button. It gives you a little message that says, hey, we get your credit card, you know, but when we hit the OK button, not only does it mark those seats as taken, but when we change the drop down and come back to this movie, you'll notice those seats are marked as taken. All right. Does anyone have questions before we dive in? Does everyone understand the scope and the requirements of the project? Number one job as an engineer is to not say, hey, can I go build this? How can I build this? It's to understand what you're building. So we're looking at this and we're like, all right, we're going to need a drop down. We're going to need to be able to keep track of all those seats. We're going to need to work on some icons there to get the seats to show up. We're going to make sure that we can click on the seats. We're going to make sure we've got a button to mark those seats as taken. And we've got to be able to keep track of all of that data as we are going. All right, let's go ahead and dive on in. We're going to pop open our VS Code. I'm going to go to the My Code folder on my desktop. My Code. I'm going to make a new folder called Week 8. I'm going to create a new folder called Day 1. I'm going to take my Day 1, drag that into my VS Code and close out anything that I have. I'm going to make 2 new files, index.html and script.js. I am going to put in my HTML template with an exclamation point equals. I am going to start a live share for you guys. I am going to put in an H1 that says Max's Movies. And I'm also going to put in my script tag with an src to my script.js. And finally, I am going to put a console.log. Let's watch some movies. And I'm going to go live. I'm going to make sure that I not only see Max's Movies, but when I inspect, I can go to my console and see let's watch some movies. Do not worry if you get a red 500 on the favicon. That is not a big deal.
I'm not remembering why. Why does the console.log need to happen? Like, I know that it has a purpose, but I can't remember why.
Good question. It is because we want to test that this script.js is working, because we could write 10 lines of our JavaScript and be bashing our head against the keyboard going, why is this not working? All I wanted to do is to make the on-click work, and it's saying it can't find the on-click function, and I don't know what's wrong. And it could be that you like accidentally put like scripts.js down here or something like that. So we just put the console log, let's watch some movies in there, just so that we have something to test, to make sure that this line is actually working and that the HTML is talking to our JavaScript. And once we have it working, we can delete the console log, but it's just to have something testable so that we can make sure our script tag is working.
Okay, that makes sense. And I thought it was something like that, but I wasn't sure.
Good question. Give you guys a minute to catch up. Make sure you've got your console popped open. We will certainly be using the console tonight. And you know what? We are going to do one more file. We've got enough JavaScript here that we're going to make a separate style.css. Make sure you do not have this pound sign at the beginning of your style.css file. That is just the icon that VS Code puts in there. So I can target, let's say that I'm going to, just so we have something to test, I'm going to target the body element, and let's text align center. And just for the same reason of our script.js, we also want to make sure that our CSS is linked in. And if we have a blank CSS file, there's no way of knowing whether or not it's actually working or not. So I'm going to put this body text align center in, because if we look at our final version, you'll notice everything is centered there anyway. So I'm going to put my body text align center and then go back to my index.html, change my title tag to movies, and I am going to put in my link with my rel style sheet and my href of style.css, and go ahead and close out that link tag. My Max's movies moves over to the right to get everything centered, and I should be good to go. The three things you're looking for: your H1 to be centered, your JavaScript let's watch some movies showing up, and the H1 itself showing up. So I guess only two things. Pausing there, making sure your H1 is centered and your console is saying, let's watch some movies. And if it is, we're ready to start building out an interface. Anyone need help or another minute? Important to look back. Week 8, we are officially 1/3 of the way through the program. Think about how much you would be screaming bloody murder if I went at that speed 8 weeks ago. Major progress, right? We're understanding style sheets, we're understanding scripting, we're going, all right, I'm not typing letter for letter what Max is doing. I'm understanding the steps, I'm getting them memorized, I'm seeing how to start things from scratch. It is important to note that professionally, you probably will not be starting things from scratch as often as we do in class, but very important that you can do that.
Hey, Max.
Yeah.
So mine is not, I'm not getting the, oh my gosh, the words that I'm supposed to be getting.
The
let's
words
watch
up
the
at the top,
movies.
or, okay.
Yeah.
So 2 things to check. One, make sure your file name is script.js and that you've got the console.log in there. Make sure that you've got double quotes and this is a single quote. Sometimes you get tripped up in quotage of them canceling each other out. And then also check your script tag right here. And then make sure that both your index and your script are saved.
Everything looks fine.
Go ahead, share screen. Let's take a look.
Okay.
Script.js, src, script.js. Okay, go ahead and pop open your script.js. Okay, all of that looks fine. So let's go back over to the browser. I think you may accidentally be in the terminal. So you do have Let's Watch Some Movies. If you open your console and go to the console, you do have your Let's Watch Some Movies.
Okay.
So a good thing to bring up, when we're writing JavaScript that's running in our browser, it's going to show in the browser console. If we're running our JavaScript in Node, it's going to show in the terminal in VS Code. So we only used Node so that we could run our JavaScript without having to hitch it into some HTML to get the browser to run it. So we actually won't be using anything in Node or the terminal until we get back to server-side development, and that's when Node is going to start creeping in. So all of your Node language, you can put it in a nice little bundle and move it to the side of your head, and then we'll be coming back to that a little bit later.
Okay, so I can just get rid of that.
You sure can.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Okay, any other questions? Anyone else need help? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and look at our final version, and I see this little message that says select a movie to see seating options. Okay, it's pretty easy. We come in, we build our interface, and we say select a movie to see seating options. And no matter how simple it seems to us, we always want to give the user some direction, right? We want the user to be able to know what's the first thing I'm supposed to do on this page. Okay. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look at my select. And my select is going to have a couple options in it, right? And the options are going to be, I don't know, I'm going to just make up some movies here. But I'm only going to put 2 of them in, because if I look at my dropdown, I'm going to need to know which one of these movies is selected. And each one of those movies has a different price associated with that. So because all of these movies have different pieces of data associated with them, I'm going to need to be able to work with that in my JavaScript. So instead of building out all of the options here, instead, I'm going to make an array called movies. Or I'm going to make it a variable, I should say, called movies. And I need to keep track of a bunch of different information about this movie, or all the movies that are out there. So I'm going to make that an object, because I don't want to reference these movies by an index number. I don't want to say what's movie number 3 in the array. I want to be able to say, hey, go get the movie called Legally Blonde. Go get the movie called Fast and Furious. I want to be able to reference it by the name of the movie, not necessarily the number of the movie in the array. And because of that, I'm going to choose to structure this data as an object instead. Would it work as an array? Absolutely. but we're thinking about what's going to be the easiest way to access the data in this variable. And in this case, I think it's going to be an array, an object, sorry. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to work on my movies object. And I'm going to load up a couple movies in here. So I'm going to say Legally Blonde. And I'm putting it in quotes because I've got a space in the name of the object key. So because we've got spaces or numbers, we're not camel casing them. Because of that, they need to be in quotes. And now I come in here and I start thinking about, all right, what about these movies do I need to keep track of? Well, I need to keep track of the seats because that movie theater is going to have different seats that are available. And I also need to keep track of the price of the movie because all of our movies have different prices. Because I need to keep track of two pieces of information, my head immediately goes, do I want an array or do I want an object? Well, just like I want to be able to reference the name of the data that I'm trying to get for the movies, I want to be able to do that same thing with my object. I want to be able to say, hey, go get the price of Legally Blonde instead of saying, go get index 0 of Legally Blonde and happening to know that index 0 contains that price information. So I am going to use my first object inside of an object. And I say first, maybe it hasn't been our first. Where else, what other code did we work with where we saw an object inside of another object?
Calculator.
Calculator. I don't think we used an object in an object, did we? I was thinking of Taylor. Yeah, you got it. The school example, right? We said, hey, go get elementary school, then go get the teachers in the elementary school. Then, right, we were nesting in, the JavaScript challenge. You got it, Kenny, right? That onion approach, that's what we're going to be using here. So I'm going to say Legally Blonde, and I'm going to say the price of the movie. And now I don't need quotes here because I don't have a space in the word price. And then here, because the price we want to be able to do math on it, I'm going to just type it in as a number. And I also need to keep track of the seats. Now, this is something that we're going to come back to because we're actually going to generate this. But here we're going to say, all right, how am I keeping track of the seats? I don't want to name each one of the seats. I don't want to say seat 1, seat 2, seat 3. I just want to keep track of a list of all of the seats. Because of that, I'm going to start the seats out as an array. We're going to come back to getting that array generated out in a second. Okay, I'm going to then proceed loading up with this object with 4 different movies that we can test with. So I'm going to say, stop. Where do I add another movie? If I put a comma right here and named the movie, that movie would be inside Legally Blonde. I don't want that movie inside Legally Blonde. So what I'm going to do is put a comma at the end of this curly, put another curly in, a comma. I'm going to go down onto the next line, and I'm going to name my next movie. Then I'm going to mirror my data structure. The colon is telling it, hey, this is the key. After the colon is telling it the value of that key, and I'm going to store the same information inside each one of them.
Max, does it matter if we use the same, like, you know how we did in our HTML, we put the two movies, or should we do like pick a different movie than what's in?
Doesn't matter. We're about to overwrite what is in these options, and we're going to see how we do that in a second.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter what you have in these options. And And finally, and do not ask me where I am picking these movies from, because in my example, I picked from the AFI like top 100 movies. And if you want to know how deranged my mind is, Paul Blart Mall Cop is actually a movie that came to mind. So do not take my, I don't even know if I've seen that movie. We'll finish with a classic here. Feel free to use your own movies. Totally optional what you do for setting the price, as long as it's a number. And Natasha, we use a comma because we're continuing the object. We use a semicolon at the end of the object to say, now we're done with this entire object. But the comma, just like we're a comma in a sentence is saying, hey, there's more coming. That's what the comma is doing here in the object, both here and here. So we're looking at our object and we're saying, hey, Legally Blonde is the key. What is the value? Oh, it's a new object, that curly braces. Okay, what are the keys in Legally Blonde? Price and seats. What are the values? They always come after the colons. So 8, and in this case, an empty array.
Got it.
So take a moment, make sure that you have not angered Prettier. If you have angered Prettier, you've got a syntax issue here. Go back through, make sure, get at least 4 movies loaded up. You can always go back later and add more if you would like. Sequoia, what's up?
Can you please explain one more time why we use is it called a bracket? Where the seats at?
Right here?
Not the, maybe it's not a bracket. Where we put seats, what is that again?
It
Yeah.
is a bracket. This is a square bracket or brace, and this is a curly bracket or brace. So the reason why we did this here is we are setting it up because we aren't going to name our seats by a seat name. We're going to just keep track of a list of all of the seats, right? We're going to say, hey, first row, seat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Second row, seat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what we're going to do is actually generate out these seats in a moment. But because we want to keep track of them by the number of the seat instead of the like name of the seat, we're going to store it as an array.
Okay.
So basically we're setting us up for the future to say, hey, we're going to keep track of each one of these rows as a list or an array of seats, as opposed to naming each one of the seats and then using that as an object. And Allie, did you have a question about a colon? Or were you just chiming in?
Sorry, I was typing in my notes and then it went and started doing some extra stuff over here, but the colon just is used for objects.
The colon is used for objects. Yeah, I feel like I'm missing another time that we use a colon, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. Yes, the colon is just used for objects, and it's to separate the key from the value. All right, anyone have questions?
Yeah, mine is I'm looking at Prettier and it's definitely screaming at me.
All right.
Now you can show why.
Take a look at your code. Do you have any red squigglies anywhere?
Yes, under seats specifically.
Okay, so make sure that you've got your comma on the price on the line above it.
Yeah, that's where it was at. All right, I'm good.
Oh, Palash, thank you. Ternary operator is another colon. We haven't done ternaries yet, but they'll be coming back in. I don't think we'll use them in regular JavaScript, but we will be using them in React, even though they are a regular JavaScript concept. Yeah, I was thinking, I think you use a colon in some loop type as well, but ternaries are a good example of where else we use them.
Switch
Okay.
statements.
Oh God.
Ooh.
Boo. Ew. Sorry, I'm not a switch statement fan. If you've gone through free code camp, you'll notice that it is one thing that I don't normally cover or teach. It is valid JavaScript, but I am not a switch statement fan. All right. Anyone need help? Anyone need a minute? We ready to get going?
Max,
Okay.
can I just share
Oh, yeah.
something real quick? Sorry.
Go for it.
Not like my screen. I accidentally put a semicolon instead of a colon. I don't know if anybody else noticed this, but when I was going back through it to see, what I did to why Prettier was giving me red. When I highlighted the area, it told me that a colon was expected and not a semicolon. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, Prettier can be helpful. You just want to be careful. So if I like put a colon here and save, if you click on Prettier, it will tell you sometimes unexpected token, expected comma. So you have to scroll up sometimes, but it is pointing exactly to where the issue is. So Prettier can be your friend. Just be careful because Prettier can also send you down a rabbit hole and tell you the error is somewhere where it actually isn't. That can be a good tip. If you don't know why Prettier is mad at you, click on the little pop-up, scroll up, and sometimes you can find the issue right in there. Okay, so I'm going to save. I'm going to come back over to my browser, and you notice we've got Legally Blonde and Fast and Furious sitting here, but we've got all of our movies going on here. So we need some way to get the name of the movie to sync in to the dropdown here. So before we do that, let's kind of step by step plan out what we need to do in order for that to get loaded in. So first thing is, well, in order for my JavaScript to be able to identify this dropdown, I'm going to need to get select from HTML using ID. Then I'm going to need to add ID to select so we can access it in our HTML, in our JavaScript. I know what I'm doing. Okay. Now, once I get it, I need to loop over each one of the movies and generate an option tag for each movie. Natasha, I'm not using an input tag. A select dropdown is kind of in the same family as an input tag. A select behaves exactly the way an input does. It's just a different name for it. And then once I've generated all of the options for each movie, I am going to put the options into the inner HTML of select tag. Okay. That kind of makes sense. Take a moment and say, do I understand what I'm trying to do? Do I understand? All right, I need to go through each one of these movies. And for each one of the movies, I'm going to generate an option tag that looks like this. So let's get started. I take my add ID to select so we can access in JavaScript. I'm going to take my ID and I am going to say movie selection. Then I'm going to come down and I'm going to say get select from HTML using ID. Okay, well, we've got to have a place to put that select. So I'm going to say select a const movie dropdown. Why const? Because that ID is always going to be the same, right? The content inside the ID may change, but we're not changing the select itself. Movie dropdown is going to be the name of our variable. We camel case it because we're in JavaScript. We don't want spaces in our variable names. I'm going to say equals, and then I'm going to say, wait, I'm getting it from my HTML document. Now, what do I want to do with the document? I want to get the element by ID, and the ID is going to be movie selection. Okay, then drop down you could do as drop down with a capital D, as long as you were consistent on the naming of it. You can name this whatever you want as long as you are consistent. I don't know if drop down is technically hyphenated, so totally personal preference whether you want to do a capital D or a lowercase d in that drop down. Okay, now that I've got my drop down, we could test this individual part, but I think it's going to be easier to test this as a whole. So now we come down here and it says loop over each one of the movies. Okay, well, how do we loop over each one of the movies? We're going to do a for loop, and we're going to say for const movie of, and I'm going to go up, and this says movies. So I'm going to say movies, and all I'm going to do is console log out the movie. Did I spell it wrong? Okay, so I do that, and I come over here, and it says movies is not iterable. In plain English, what do you think not iterable means?
You can't go over it.
I would say not readable.
You can't go over each step of the movies. Iterable means, hey, every time we get a new movie, that's a new iteration. And so we're looking at the movies here, and I'm like, well, what do you mean you can't go through each one of them? There's Legally Blonde, there's Star Wars. What data type do we usually loop over?
Arrays.
An array, right? And an array is that list of the data. Of course, arrays are iterable. Each one of these is what I want. But this is not an array. This is an object. So in order to tell the computer we want to loop over each item in this object, we have to use a special function called object.entries. And when we get the entries from an object, we're going to get out two pieces of information. We're going to get out the key and the value. So I'm going to modify my console log to give me the key and the value back out. Kenny, we could put the objects in an array, but I don't want to do that because when I reference my movies, I want to be able to say, hey, movies.legally blonde instead of movies bracket 0, right? Because I don't want to have to keep track of every index. I want to be able to reference it by the title of the movie. So this is preferred in this scenario, but that doesn't mean sometimes you get information from the API and they do have everything in an index, and then you've got to work with it differently. So it does depend. In this case, that was an intentional choice. So you cannot loop over an object on its own. You can't just throw the object in a for loop, but with special helper functions like object.entries, we can then loop over the object. Allie, what's up?
Okay, so my question here is, so the way that you worded the for loop, so we have to use key value here instead of movies and movie and movies.
Hold on to that thought for a second.
Okay.
Very good question that I'm going to cover. Does anyone not get this in their output? Okay, so let's take a look at this output. What is, oh, go ahead, Goggin.
Mine is not working for some reason.
Do you have an error in your console?
Yes.
What is your error?
Object is not defined.
Do you have a capital O?
Oh, I did not.
That will get you.
I'm getting an error too. So it's giving me this error, script JS1617, and when I click on it, it's pointing to the console log statement. Yeah, and I have it exactly like you, console.log key value.
Share screen.
Like,
Okay, so I updated my line 15 to get key value of object entries.
Gotcha. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Max, before we go on, can you explain why we did the key value again?
Hold that thought. Yes, hold that thought. So let's look at our, oh, Goggin, what's up?
Still not working.
Okay, share screen.
Oh my god. 1 second. I'm trying to fix it.
Object entries is not a function, or its return value is not iterable. Well, it's a little liar. Let me request remote and see. You've got N tires and trees.
Oh,
There you go.
all right, there you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so let's figure out what this object.entries is doing. We called these two things key value, but I hate when we use generic variable names. So let's figure out what's coming out here. The key, what's coming out is Legally Blonde Star Wars Paul Blart. That is the left side of our object name, right? That is indeed the key, but I don't like using generic names. So instead of calling this key, I'm going to rename this to, let's call it movie title. Now, when I save, I get the same exact output, but now I know what's coming out of this. Whenever I reference this, it is going to be very specifically named movie title, so I know what's going into it. Okay, now what's in the value? That is the data about the movie, right? That is the price and that is the seats. So I am going to call this instead movie data. And when I use them consistently, now I have a little bit better name of what's going on. Okay, so why did we use object.entries? The problem that we run into is movies is an object. We want to be able to loop through each one of those movies. We can't do that on its own. So what we do is we use this object.entries, which makes our object iterable, meaning we can loop over it. We can deal with each iteration of the items inside of the object. The problem is that object.entries gives us back two pieces of information. It gives us back the key of the object, and it also gives us back the value of the object. Because it's giving us back two pieces of information, we now need to include these square braces in our for loop. Because two pieces of information, and whenever we deal with multiple pieces of information, we're probably dealing with an array. Now, what information are we getting out from the object entries? We're getting out the key and the value, which are getting dumped into our variables that we named movie data and movie title. Now, just to make sure our loop is working, we log out the title and the data coming right from our for loop, and we test to make sure, hey, does the movie title show up in our console? And hey, does the data about that movie show up as well? Do we have any questions about that? Goggin.
So my question is that how can we change the name? Like, why is it like underneath the movie title, the name is still the key? Like underneath that, like on back, or it just I don't know. Like
When we make a for loop, we can name whatever each iteration of the item coming out of the for loop, we can name that whatever variable we want. So the same thing goes here, except now instead of having one thing of every time we iterate over the loop, where would you like us to put the thing that we're iterating over? This time we've got two different variable names because we want to be able to get the key or the movie title and the value, which is going to go into the movie data.
But how does it know that the movie title is so associated with the key?
Because object.entries is always going to take whatever is in the first thing in the array and store it there.
Oh, okay. All right, I got it.
And then the same thing goes for movie data. It's the second item in the array, so it's going to put it in there.
Oh, okay, got it. That makes sense. All right.
So Quota and Ali, did that answer your question? If not, come off mute and unmute or and ask it again.
Okay, so personally for me, like I guess I kind of get it. So we're using that object.entries just to signify the object, which was movies, which were created in a JS file earlier.
Correct. Yes, the movies that we're referencing here are the same movies from right up here.
Okay, and then we have to use that method because those were created as objects, right?
Correct. So
Alright.
we can't loop over an object directly. We need to kind of help out the for loop so it knows how to loop over the object. And we're basically saying get each entry of the object. Well, what's each entry of the object consist of? It consists of the key, which is the movie title, and the value, which is the data that we're storing inside of this key. Because the entries are involved with both of them, we have to use this array here because we're getting access to both pieces of information that are associated with the entry of each item in the movies.
Okay, I get that part. So down in the console on the web browser where it says array and then it says 0. So if we had items listed in the array, would it also show those items or would it show how many?
Both. It's going to show array 1. And then if we click on the little drop down to get more information about it, we can see the item inside of it.
Okay, yeah, I totally get it. Thank you.
Yep.
So I just wanted to just say yes, I do get it. But I wanted to say, like, so for future references when we're doing something like this on our own, we should rename the key and value for something that basically makes sense to whatever we're coding, right? So
I should be able to read your code and say, I don't really know how object.entries works, but because you're named the variables properly, I can understand what data is supposed to be in those variables. So oftentimes you'll see people do something like this. And that is a guaranteed way to get a slap across the face if you ever showed me code like this, because I'm like, what the heck is K and V? Key value? Okay. How much longer is it going to take you to type in the EY after that? I would much rather see key and value, but even beyond that, I would love to see one step further. I would like to see those variables be named descriptively.
Okay.
Shay, what's up?
Okay, so I just want to clarify. So we use movie data because each key has multiple values into them, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So we still use the same movie data even if it just had one variable or one value?
We could probably name it a little bit better.
Oh,
So
you
we
probably-
could
okay.
name it, you know, if we only had if we did something like this, where we said const prices and we said Citizen Kane is just $11. When we did our loop over that, I would call it still movie title, but then I would call
Movie
this price.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Palash, what's up?
So that means this will be a standard for every time we're gonna loop over an object using a for loop, right? This should be like for const in square brackets, one variable, second variable, console log.
If you need to loop over both, if you need to loop over it and get access to both the key and the value, this is a go-to. This is how you can always loop over an object. There are other ways that you can loop over an object. For example, if I didn't need access to the information inside of it, if I only needed access to the keys of the movies, I could do something like const title of object dot keys movies, and then console log out the title of that, if I spelled title right in both places. And now you'll see what comes out is just the titles of the objects or the keys of the objects. So it's not to say that every time you loop over an object, you have to use object entries. You could also loop over the values and get out the data and log out the data. And now I don't get any of the keys. I only get the values of those keys. So there are different helper functions depending on what you need access to. In this scenario, though, we will need access to both the name of the key and the value associated with it. So we use the object.entries, which is a combo of .keys and .values.
Got it. So object.entries, whenever we use it in a for loop to loop over an array, we'll have to do that key value pair in the, got it.
Correct, yes. And I don't know, hypothetically, you could do this, but if you're doing this, I would rather you use .keys instead of .entries. Goggin, what's up?
Oh man, I'm still like, I don't know why I'm buggy on this one, but so now you said like if we do use object dot entries, right? So we are selecting the whole object. So
Yep.
everything in the object we are selecting that, right? So once you do movie title, that means is the key, and the second one is always gonna be a value because there's
Yep.
only one key and multiple values. That can
There are multiple keys. The different keys are Legally Blonde, Stars, Paul Blart, and Citizen Kane. The values for those keys are an object stored in each one of the keys.
So what if we want to just get like one of the keys instead of all of them using same thing?
That's just using one of the keys. The whole point of a for loop is that we need to go over each one of them. We need to go over each one of them because I want each one of them to show in this dropdown. Now, there are times that we won't do that, right? There will be times that we're saying, hey, we want to show the weather data here, and the weather data, we just want to get to the temperature. So we're going to say weather data dot current temperature dot conditions dot temp, right? We don't want to loop over every piece of data that is inside that weather data. We just want to go in and peel back the onion and pull out the piece of the information that you want.
Okay, so so using the object entries is completely fine as if we're just gonna get one single thing out of there.
We don't need object entries if we're not looping over the data.
Okay.
But because we want to loop over the data, that's why. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so we kind of haven't made any headway here, right? Because we looped over each one of the movies, but we haven't done anything with it yet. We just console logged it out. So what I'm going to do is it says generate an option tag for each movie. Okay, well, the problem is I need some place to be able to store all those different option tags. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to say let options equal an empty string. It's an empty string because we want to be able to add to it as we're building all of them. But as we're building them, it's kind of like adding items to a list. We can't add the items to a list unless there's that piece of paper where the list has already been made, right? Even if it's blank, we need that blank place to be able to put each one of these in. Okay, now we are going to say options. We are going to add an option onto the options that already exist. So the plus equal is a shorthand to say add on to the end of the options that we're generating here. And then we need to build the HTML for it. So the HTML, what does that HTML look like? That looks like this up here. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say option. And then I'm going to put in a plus and I'm going to put in the movie title. And then I'm going to close out that option. And once I have my options generated, I'm going to finally put the options into the inner HTML of the select tag. So I'm going to finally use my movie dropdown that I queried up here. And I'm going to say the inner HTML of that movie dropdown is going to equal the options that we just generated. So I save, I come back over to my dropdown, and now I have all 4 movies in my dropdown. Before I forget, I'm going to go back up to my movie selection. I'm going to delete out the options because they're getting overwritten. We're using all the movie data in the JavaScript. So I can take that out, leave this as an empty select tag. And we know that this isn't actually going to be empty because we are generating the HTML for it in our JavaScript, then using our document object model to load up the options that we're generating right here into our dropdown here. Natasha, what's up?
So you're using 3 different languages right now. You've got JavaScript, index.html, and style CSS.
Yes.
Okay, because I noticed earlier that the quotation marks matter in the languages we're using. Like you gave us that JS homework and I was reading it from an HTML document, trying to do JS stuff, realizing I wasn't in a JS file and it wouldn't work. So thanks for that confusion. But on line 30 in JavaScript, the quotation marks are outside of the what are these things called?
The square arrows or
No,
the arrows, just the
yeah, well,
arrows.
those things. Yeah, like how would I know to make sure that is that way? It's just I'm confused. I'm sorry. I don't even know what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so let's look at this because what I had up here was option, and then in between them was the movie name, and then the
Right.
closing option, right?
Yep.
Why is movie title not in quotes?
Because that's not the name of the movie.
I don't want the letters MOVIETITLE to show up. I
Right.
want the value of movie title to show up.
Mhm.
Now let's look at our option tag. I actually want the arrow to show up and OPTION to show up because that's exactly what I have up here.
Right.
So I'm putting it in quotes because I'm like, JavaScript, I don't want you to go find what an option is. I literally just want you to put the option in there, the word option in there, and put that tag. Now, what goes inside of that tag oh, that's actually going to be the name of the movie, the title. And then I need to be able to close out that option. And we can see that working because if we go into the inspect in our JavaScript and open up the select, we can see each one of these options show up.
Right.
Well, the options here are empty now, right? There's nothing in there. So how are these options showing up? It's because we're generating that string.
Got it.
And then taking that and putting it inside the dropdown.
So you're calling for everything that has the option tag, even though you have several different options?
I'm not really calling everything. I'm only getting the select. I'm getting the movie selection. I'm generating the HTML that should go inside that select. And then I'm putting that HTML back inside the select.
Okay. Layers on layers on layers. Thank you.
Wait, so I have a quick question. So the options that we're generating come from the movie titles though? That's why.
They do. And in fact, if we change this to Legally Blonde number 2, notice what changes up here.
Okay, so just for just to get this down pat purposes, can you explain the options plus equals line to me? Explain, I get that we're pulling I'm not understanding the syntax of it.
Okay, so just answered that for Natasha. So a reminder that when other students are asking questions, make sure you're paying attention. So the option here, we don't actually want when we look at movie title, we don't want the letters MOVIETITLE to show up. We want the actual movie title to show up that we're looping over each time here. So that's why it's not in quotes here. But if you look at our select up here, our select has an option in. So what we're basically doing is taking this and generating it every time that we loop over the movies. So we actually want an arrow to show up, the letters option and the closing arrow. Then we take in the movie title and we throw the movie title in at the end of the option tag. Then we want the closing option tag to show up. So what we're basically doing each time we run through each movie, we are generating out. Let me comment this out. We're generating out option, the name of the movie, and the closing option tag. We do that for each one of the movies, then take all of the options that we generated here and put it inside the movie dropdown HTML.
Oh, okay, I see. So it's just option is just like creating those option brackets around movie title. That way, when we use it from inside the quote, like when we call it, it's showing up that way, like for the code.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And according to the JavaScript, this is just a string, right? And it's a string with the option tag and the movie title put in it. And it goes, it's a string, it's a string, it's a string. I don't really care about any of the syntax in there. That's just text. Then we get down here and we use the movie dropdown, which is coming from our document object model. And what happens is when it goes into the inner HTML, the document object model goes, oh shit, man, there's some HTML in here. All right, where are you putting this? Oh, you're putting this HTML in an option in a select. Because it's going in a select, I now know that this dropdown has each one of those options. So the JavaScript doesn't really care about this syntax. All that it cares about is that it's adding a string next to another string next to another string. But as soon as we put it inside that HTML again, the HTML wakes up and it goes, oh, those are option tags. I know how to use option tags, and it loads it up in here.
Would you still need the option tags in the HTML section after you're doing that, or can you?
No, these you can now take out, and that would be preferred because you're overwriting them anyway. Anyone need help? Anyone not have your options showing up in the dropdown?
Okay, I have another quick question.
Yep.
So would it be easier, like let's say we already had everything we needed for like this project, we didn't have to figure anything out. Would it be easier to write this stuff first and then go back and add movie titles and like information later after you already, or no? Would you?
You're saying like, oh, I've got 8 more movies that I want to add here.
Yeah, like after you've already wrote the like, because like after you've already wrote the code for it to go through the options, would you then want to go back and add the rest of them?
You could. Yeah, you definitely oftentimes like you're going to find that we're going to take an approach on something here and then realize that there's a more efficient way of doing it in the JavaScript. And part of that is refactoring. And then the other part of that is recognizing that, hey, these movies are going to change over time. So we want to structure the data in a way that makes it easier to update for a non-programmer. And so, yes, there are definitely times that you modify your data structure or want to add in more information. And if you finish the entire project, sometimes you get hindsight of how to do it better. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. Before I wrap this up, because I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about this, right? We get the element, we're looping over all of the data, everything's coming together, but I go look at our final version. What do you notice going on here? I also have the price information showing up in parentheses. So there are 2 ways of doing this. I can come back in here, and in my options, I can add in another plus. And I'm going to say there's a space that's going to show up and a parenthesis. And then outside of that, I want the movie data, right? That is each one of these objects. And then I want the price in particular. So I'm going to say dot price. Then I also want a closing parenthesis to show up at the end of that. I think I also have a $sign in here. So I save that, I come back over and I take a look, and now I have my prices showing up in parentheses. But if you're looking at this, this is getting really nasty syntactically, right? We've got all these pluses. This looks like a lot of quotes, a lot of concatenation. There's got to be a better way of writing this. That is when we get into something called a template literal. So instead of writing it out this way, I'm actually going to comment this line out, and I'm going to say options plus equals like normal, but instead of using a single or double quotes, I'm going to use the backtick. Now you may be saying, where in God's name is the backtick and how do you type it? The backtick is between the escape and the tab key, the tilde key. And if you just push that once, it's going to put in the backticks for you. Now, the backtick works like a string normally. So we can still put in our option and our closing option tag. But instead of having to use a bunch of pluses and putting in the opening quotes and the closing quotes and keeping track and making sure it's concatenating properly, we can instead use this syntax of a $sign and a curly brace. And inside that curly brace, we can put in movie title. The $sign curly brace are saying, hold up, instead of reading whatever is in here as a string, I am going to go get whatever the value of movie title is and replace this entire section with the movie title. We can also put in our movie data dot price, and keep in mind dot price is coming because it is a key that we're accessing here. And I can even put in my $sign here. And now we can generate out that same exact text using the template literal. So take a moment say, why are we using a template literal? Because this syntax gets gets really messy. It's easy to lose track of your opening quotes and your closing quotes. It's easy to forget a plus or get a double plus. That's a lot going on. So the template literal, we have to use the backticks here, but it's a way that we can literally template out the string the way we want it. And each part of the template that we want to get the value of a variable to show up in there, we use those $ curly braces. And once we get those $ curly braces in there, that is the equivalent of saying, close the quote, get a plus, drop the value of the string or whatever variable we're referencing in here, then do another plus, start it up again, and keep going. So think of it literally as a template. Okay, what does a template look like? It is a way that we can repeat something over and over again. What is the template for this? It is the word option, and then wherever we have the $ curly braces is like the Mad Lib line. It's saying go drop in the value of whatever is in there. So this, this and this do the exact same thing to the computer. The computer is just keeping track of a string. This is just syntax that we can use only if we use the backtick, which is by the escape 1 and tab keys all in the top left of your keyboard. And we can only use this $ curly brace syntax if the string we're using is in a backtick. According to the computer, this and this are exactly equal. We could put those in an if statement and the computer would tell you those are equal. That is true. So this is just a shortcut for when we are trying to build a string that includes some variables. This is a quicker way to do it. The $ curly brace is how you start pumping the information into the template. Yes, it is like the Mad Lib line that is like saying, hey, fill in this blank here. I will be using template literals extensively, so if you have any questions about them, now is a great time to ask. There are others. There are other what, Allie?
Like for this, is it just option because we know that option goes inside a select, or do we just use a different name for option?
No, we use option because the option is what's going inside of the select.
Okay.
Right. So if we wanted to, this is just we could say const color equals blue. And then we could say console.log, the sky is color. And we see the sky is blue. And then if we change this to red, we get the sky is red.
Okay, thank you.
Would be the same thing as saying the sky is plus color. Natasha, what's up?
Hey, so line 32, we are using parentheses to separate the two different templates.
Parentheses or curly braces?
Parentheses.
So we're
There's
using the
in
parentheses.
between two sets of curly braces.
I'm only using the parentheses because I want the parentheses to actually show up in the drop-down option.
Oh, okay.
So if I wanted to, I could say like put a dash between them.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm getting the dash
okay.
instead.
So anything in between the two, like the ending.
Anything that's not in a curly
is going to be shown visibly.
Correct. And that's the reason why I've got a double $ here. The first $ is because I actually want the $ to show up. The second $sign is paired with the curly here
To satisfy the template.
You got it.
Okay, thank you.
Rain, you would want to think through like what does that look like to the end user, right? So if oh, your question disappeared. But if you wanted to add in additional drop-down values, you would want to think, is that a second drop-down that shows up? And when they pick the first genre drop-down, it then filters the second drop-down. But I'm not quite sure if that answers your question.
Hello. I am so stuffed up from the pollen that's been in the air, so I'm trying not to be verbal today. But okay. What I'm asking is, okay, so if we gave the consumers like a genre option, would we use the option element, or would we have to go about that a different way, a different concept, or a different element?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, because we want to think about it in our interface before we think about it in our JavaScript. So we could hypothetically say, oh, we're going to add in another select here, right, where it's comedy and horror and romance, right? And what we want to do is make it so that when we pick one of these, it's going to change whatever's in this list. Well, here we're using options. That's one way to approach this, but we could hypothetically also put in a span tag that said comedy and horror and romance. And when they clicked on any one of these words, that's what would change this dropdown. Well, in this case, we're using a span, or we could even use an anchor tag because they're going to be clicking on it instead of using an option with the dropdown. So it just depends what interface are you giving to the user, and based off of that, that's how we would determine whether we're going to use an option or a span or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
And if we were generating that using our HTML, if we had an array up here, and we were looping over each one of those categories, then it would depend again on what interface we're displaying to the user, and that's would determine what tag we would use down here. Okay, so I'm going to take out these examples. I'm going to leave this commented in so you can see that this and this do the exact same thing. I'm going to just modify this because I think the dash is a little bit easier. I'll leave it as is. Okay, so we've got our movies generating. I've got one problem. When I load my page for the first time, there's no movie selected. In order to pull that off, instead of starting out the options as empty, instead, I'm going to start out the options with an empty option inside of it. Now, when I come back over, I start with a blank dropdown, and when I select one of them, I am good to go.
Well, mine doesn't do that.
You modified line 25?
No, I didn't. I just refreshed it and it was like working fine.
So if you refresh it without adding this in here, you'll notice that a movie is selected by default.
Oh, yeah. All right.
I don't want that, right? I want them to be able to come in and have to pick a movie in order for it to be selected. So I'm going to add in that option. And now it comes in as blank and I can select a movie from there. Okay, let's do a quick review and then we can go on break. When we come back, we've got to figure out how do we generate out all of those seats to keep track of the screen and all of that kind of information. So what happens? How does the computer read this code? So the computer comes in and goes, all right, HTML. We don't start in JavaScript. We start in our HTML. Going to have an H1 show up. Okay, no problem. I'm going to have a P tag show up. No problem. I'm going to make a select show up, and I'm going to remember that there is an ID on that select, but it doesn't look like that select has any options yet. So when they click on the dropdown, just nothing is going to show up. HTML is almost done. It thinks it's off the hook and it sees this script tag. And it's like, oh crap, I got to go run the JavaScript. So it switches over to our JavaScript and it starts all the way up at the top. And it says, all right, I need to console log. Let's watch some movies. That shows up in the console. Okay, what's next? Okay, movies is a new variable called, and we know it's a new variable because it's a const. What kind of data type is in movies? Curly brace, that must mean it's an object. Okay, what keys are inside of our object? There are 4 keys inside of our object: Legally Blonde, Star Wars, Paul Blart, and Citizen Kane. Great. What are the values inside each one of those keys? Oh, it's a new object. Why do we need a new object? Because we're keeping track of multiple pieces of information, and the way we want to be able to access that information is by using the key in order to get out the values. So each one of these movies, each one of these keys has an object for a value, and inside of that object, we have 2 keys, price and seats, that happen to have 2 different data types, one which is a number and the other which is an empty array. Why an array for seats and not objects? Because we're going to reference the seats by the seat number, the index of the seat in the array, instead of accessing it by saying seat 1A, 1B, 1C, which we would use an object for. Pausing. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yep.
Does a computer usually read or starts reading code from HTML to JavaScript to CSS, or are there any other instances where it reads different?
HTML first, then CSS, then JavaScript. It always will read it in that order if what we're opening, if the place that we're trying to run our JavaScript is in the browser.
Okay.
Yep. And it's kind of the order, if you think about it, it's the top down order. That what are we opening in our browser? We're actually opening this index.html file. Then the computer gets down to this link tag and there's like, oh, style sheets, I need to go load that. Then it processes all of our HTML and then it says, oh, you told me about the script tag. So it starts at the top of the JavaScript and then works its way down.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so inside of our JavaScript, we console log it out, and it's like movies. There's all of this information in movies, but you didn't tell me to do anything with it yet. So I'm just going to keep that in my memory banks. Now it's going to come down, and it's going to say, all right, get the select HTML using the ID. How does it do that? Document, okay, go to the HTML, go get the element by ID, and it takes the parameter or the argument movie selection. So it goes to our HTML, it finds our movie selection, and it stores it in a JavaScript variable called movie dropdown. Okay, in memory, you didn't tell me anything to do with it. I'm just going to keep track of that. Now we come down and it says, all right, make a new variable, yet another new variable called options. And what should be in my options is a string with an opening option tag and a closing option tag. The HTML doesn't know about that yet. All that it's doing is keeping track of that as a string for us down the road. Now it comes down and it goes for. Okay, we are trying to loop over something. What are we trying to loop over? We go all the way to the movies, but we need this object.entries function because movies is an object. And we need to be able to loop over each title and data, the value, the key value pairs for each item in each entry in that object. So think about the entry as basically a loop, a way to loop over each entry in the object, an entry being a key value pair. Okay, what do we want to do for each object, each entry in that object? What we want to do is make a new template literal with the option tag on one side, the closing option tag on the other, and inside that option tag, we want the movie title to come from each time we run over the loop, and the price to come out of the value of the movie data to get access to each one of these keys inside of here. Okay, now that we get that HTML generated, what do we do with it? We take it, which is just a string up until this point. The JavaScript doesn't really do anything special because it's got the option tag in it, but that string gets put back into the inner HTML from the movie dropdown that we got up here. Well, because of that, the HTML starts going through the string, and it's like, oh shit, man, there's an option tag in here. We got to do something with that. So when we come over here, now it updates that select, and inside that select, it has injected each one. You'll notice our opening and closing option tag, and each one of the options to show up there. Now that we've done all of that work, when we open the dropdown, we can see our information. "37 lines in, I'll give you what, 37 plus 15, 50 lines in, 350 to go. Check yourself. How are you feeling? Feeling like we could explain this? Feeling like we could document this in our own? Or are we getting the what are we trying to do, the how are we doing it, and the why the computer is understanding it the way that it is? If you are, great. There's more to come. If you aren't, generate some questions, have them ready for our break. We will be back at 7:30, and I will answer any questions before we add anything new. If you're not getting it now, you're not going to get the second half of class, and you're going to be lost tomorrow and the day after that. So either come back with questions or figure out how to write them down and Slack them to me, or go to the one-on-one link and go book a one-on-one with me. Go on break. See you guys at 7:30. All right. And Doug, I did hear you. Thank you for the test. Okay. You've had 25-ish minutes to digest this code. If you don't understand it now, you aren't going to understand it for the rest of class or for tomorrow or Thursday when we're continuing to work on it. So now is your time to ask questions. Is there anything in this code that you could not describe in an English sentence? That's what you want to be able to do. Read a line of code and in English to someone who doesn't know how to code, explain it in a sentence. If you can't do that, now is your time to ask questions. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we do that in JavaScript? And why does the computer read the code the way that it does? Can you answer that about all lines of code? Sometimes you don't know what the question you have is, but you know what line of code you don't understand. That's your question. That's okay to ask. So, Sequoia, what's up?
Yes, so can you explain the line 36 and 7 when we did the movie drop down, that in HTML?
Yes. So 37 is kind of a combination of 32 and 23. So it all kind of comes together. If I can find my annotation tools. Okay, so first things first, we already have a select in our HTML called movie selection. We need some way to access that in our HTML. So we use the ID, we get it out of our document, our HTML, and we store it in movie dropdown. Now we have to generate all of these options. And what do the options look like? Well, they look like the option tag with the movie title, a dash, and the price in it. But we close out that option tag and we store all of that in this variable called options. So up until after line 23, we are hands off from the HTML. Lines 24 through 35 are all JavaScript. Even though it looks like there's some HTML syntax in there, according to the JavaScript, all we're doing is looping over the JavaScript or looping over the data, right? Okay, now that we've done all of that, we have this thing called options. And so that is the options that we've generated here. They're all queued up, but now we're like, all right, we want to take these options and make it show up inside our HTML. So what we do is we take this movie dropdown, which again is going to be right in here, and we take the inner HTML, and then we put the options that we generated into that inner HTML. So this is the line that we cross that JavaScript bridge again, and we say, take all of this string JavaScript that we generated from the data and put it inside the select. So if we leave this line out, you'll notice that we don't have any errors, but we don't have anything in our dropdown. Our dropdown is empty. That's because we did all of this work to generate all of the options, but we didn't take all of the work that we just generated and put it back into the select. So basically what we're doing is we're taking all 4 options that we generated here and putting them inside the select right here. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Not in the template, but in the other option that we use to put in the option on line 31. Why did we put the opening and closing quotes inside and outside of the parenthesis?
That's because I wanted the parenthesis to show up in the text that we were generating. So I actually wanted the parentheses to show up here. So they're inside the quotes, not because we needed the parentheses for syntax, but because I actually wanted parentheses to show up in what the end user saw. So if we wanted a dash to show up instead, we could take these parentheses out and it would do the exact same thing.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So the dash matches what I ended up doing down here, but the general answer is, well, if we want parentheses to show up to the end user, we're going to put them in quotes. It's not that the parentheses are doing anything syntactical or mathematically. It's just another way to display the data.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Going once. Going twice. On to more code. Okay. So I come down here and I go, all right, when I select one of the movies, what do I want to happen? So we take off our JavaScript hats for a second and we go, all right, what is the what we are trying to accomplish? We always want to articulate what we're trying to do. So if we get lost when we're trying to do it, we can anchor it back, right? When we get error messages, sometimes we work on an error message for so long that once we get it working, we forget what we were trying to do. So this is how I set myself up to be able to go back in my comments and say, hey, if I get lost on this, if I close my computer, I'm done for the day and I come back tomorrow, I'm not going to remember what I was trying to do. So I'm going to lay that out. I'm going to go back to our final version and I'm going to say, all right, when I select a movie, the seats should appear for that movie. So I'm going to break that down. I'm going to go to my JavaScript and I'm going to say, when a movie is selected, find out what movie is selected, right? selecting a movie isn't enough. We need to know which one is going to be in there. Then make the seats show up when the movie is selected. Make sense? It's going to take us 2 hours to do that. We will not get both lines of those code done tonight. That is okay. Brandy, I think you're ready to kill someone. That's all right. This takes a lot of time, right? We are going to break this down. We're going to understand why this is such a rabbit hole to pull apart. Okay, so when a movie is selected, find out what movie is selected. All right. What concept, what JavaScript term do we lump that under? What is the term for when a user does something?
Add event listener.
That's an
Add
event.
event listener. So an event is whenever a user interacts with the page, right? Whenever something happens, that's an event. Well, we already have our movie drop down here, and we're doing some inner HTML on it, but because we already have access to it in our JavaScript, we can go ahead and reuse it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say movie drop down, and what we're going to do is say on click. Now, you could use add event listener. I've seen both syntaxes. I'm not sure that one is preferred over the other. I personally like the on click a little bit more because it's less verbose. It's a little less wordy. But if you wanted to add event listener and use the click, that is totally fine. So what do we want to happen on click? Well, we need a bunch of code to run when that option changes, right? And you know what? Sorry, my bad. It's not on click, it's on change. We don't want to have some JavaScript run when they click to open the dropdown. We want some JavaScript to run when they change the dropdown and actually pick on one of the values. So it's an on change. And because there is a group of code that needs to run when that is changed, we need a function. And so we use our arrow function to say, hey, anything between these curly braces is going to run. Now we console.log and we log out, and I'm going to rename this to event. Sorry, I'm breaking my own rules. Event, and we're going to console log out event target value. So I come over and I make sure my console's open, because if I don't have my console open, I'm not going to be able to see what's console logging out. And I pick one of my options and I see Star Wars 9. And if I pick another option, I see Legally Blonde 8. Okay. So I get when a movie is selected, find out what movie is selected. Now I get back to this big bad comment. Make seats show up when the movie is selected. Okay, well, in order to make the seat show up, I need to access the seats that are specific to this particular movie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my console.log to selected movie equals my event target value. Now, I don't need to do that step. I could use event target value wherever I am referencing what movie got selected. However, sometimes it's good to create variables because event target value, you don't really know what the event target value is unless you go in and decipher that code. So what I'm doing is I'm choosing, instead of saying event.target.value every time I reference what movie got selected, instead I'm going to be better with my variable naming and call it selected movie so I know exactly what is in the event target value. So I come down here and I am going to say, hey, the movie data that I'm trying to access is coming from my movies, right? What is my movies? That's this big object up here. And what do I want to get out of it? I don't want to get all the movies data out. I wanted to get the selected movies data out. And I'm finally going to console.log movie data because I just wrote a couple lines of code and I have no idea if this is going to work or not. Give you guys a second to catch up and then we will see what's happening in the browser. Don't be afraid to raise your hand. Let me know if you need help. All right. So I come back over here and I pick on an option and I get undefined. And I'm like, all right, let's try another one. Undefined. All right, I'm not really sure what's breaking here. So what we need to do is add in more console logs to go step by step to figure out why it's not working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log out my selected movie. And I come over here and I select my movie and I see Star Wars. And I'm like, okay. So I take my selected movie and I'm like, all right, I'm looking for Star Wars. And I come up here and I go, well, why is Star Wars not working? Star Wars shows up right here. Someone other than Palash, why can I not get Star Wars data by using a dynamic key of selected movie down here when I can see the movie's name right here? The data type being a string isn't an issue because the selected movie is a string itself. Taylor, you hit it. It is the $9. So what ends up happening here is I'm effectively typing in Star Wars. And when I type in Star Wars, you can see I get the Star Wars information right here. But what is going into the array is not Star Wars. It is Star Wars $9 because that is the entire name of my option. When I save that, now what we get is undefined because my object up here does not have the $9 as part of the name. So if I put that in there, and save and pick one of my options, now that's working. But now look what's going on. We're getting $9, $9. We think what a simple solution is to put in the $9 here is actually a really bad idea. We don't want to modify our data structure in order to just get our HTML to get the values flowing properly. So instead, what we're going to do is we are going to modify this. We're going to put back our selected movie in here. So it's using the dynamic key, but we're going to set up our HTML to use a value. And inside that value, we are going to put the movie title. What this is effectively doing is it's still letting us design whatever interface that we want to show to the end user. So if we want to use those parentheses, if we want to use that price information, we can still do that. But what we're doing in this value is telling it, hey, when you have one of these options selected, you don't need to show it to the end user, but whatever gets selected, use this value giving that information back. So now if you look at my console log down here, nothing has changed. But when I pick Star Wars, instead of getting the price information included in Star Wars, I only get the name of the movie and I get the data that I'm looking for out of the movie data from our movies up here. So you'll notice if I pick an $11 movie, I now get price 11 showing up instead. So I modified my value up here. I used my template literal to make the value of this option just be the movie title instead of the default, which was the movie title and the price information. Once I added my value here and said the only value that I'm using is the title of the movie, when I come down here and get out the event target value, I am getting the version of the movie that does not have the price information in it. And because of that, I am able to get the correct object down here. Amberlynn, you were correct. We do need to import the seats pictures, but we're going to get to that in a second. All right, so what should be happening is when you pick your movie, you should not only see the name coming out, but whatever the price is should be showing up in your console. Does anyone need help with that?
Yeah, my name is not showing up on my drop down.
Okay, share your screen. And Danny, I'll come to you next.
Hold on. So
All right. Your movie title looks good. Okay, so let's go down to your on change. And your on change is using selected movies, but we want just the selected movie. 43.
hold on. All right.
Save and
that's
see if that
from-
fixes it.
Okay. And that's okay. Hold on. So selected movie is defined. Okay.
On 41.
But the
Yep.
constant. Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Oh, before you leave, you've got a value.
Hold on. Where?
On 41, you've got a value.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay.
Now that should work for you, but give it a try and make sure.
Okay. So the names aren't still ain't popping up, just the price itself.
Yes.
Okay, that's supposed to.
So you should be getting out the name on line. You should be getting the name of the movie on one line, and then on the next line, the data for the movie, the price and the seats. Is that what you're getting?
No, I'm gonna look at it and see where I messed up at, or try to come back.
Okay.
To it.
Okay. Yeah, just raise your hand if you need another screen share. Danny, what's up?
So mine says I have an uncaught reference error. Select movie is not defined. Movie
Okay.
drop down. Blah 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 blah.
Share your screen. Let's take a look. Okay, so that's your code. Okay, so selected movie, and then it's saying on, if you notice on the error, it will say script.js:42. It's saying line 42 is your problem. So if you look at line 42, you are logging out select movie. Where is select movie defined? What are we trying to reference on 42?
The movies that I want to, the words are hard right now. I want to select that movie. pretty much
Yes.
is what I'm trying to
So
say.
where did we tell it what select movie was? What line number?
Oh god, I don't.
Too far. Go back down to that code. So we're saying, all right, when the movie drop down changes, get the event. Then take the event, get the target and the value out of it, and store that in a variable called what?
Select movie. Right?
Nope, try again.
Can you say it again?
So look at line 40 and 41. Don't move your mouse off the screen.
Okay.
Use
Okay.
only your eyes.
Yeah.
Line 40,
Okay.
movie drop down. When that changes, capture the event. Then when that event happens, I want you to do stuff. What do I want you to do? I want
I
you
want-
to take the event target value, the value that the event had, and store it in a variable called what?
I don't know. My brain is completely just shut down.
Look at line
it'd be-
41.
So it would be the target, the selected movie,
Okay.
the value.
Now that you've made that variable called selected movie, I would like you to console log out what?
The selected movie, not just select movie.
Bingo.
So I just have to, my word is just wrong in 42. I just have to write selected.
Yes.
Okay, good Lord. Ugh, thank you.
Why
Max.
why I'm torturing you over that and not just telling you that you're missing the ED is that I think you're in follow along mode, right? Do what Max does, and if mine does the same thing, I'm good. That's the what we're trying to accomplish and the how we accomplish it. It's not the why, right? Why
Right.
is the JavaScript reading it the way that it is? So what we need to do is get to that level of saying the exact way that I'm explaining it. Movie drop down, when it changes, an event happens. That event has a target, and that target has a value, and we take that value and we store it in selected movie. Now, why are we logging out selected movie in the first place? We need to make sure that the value coming through is the value that we expect without the $9 on it. So when you're looking at it at that level, you're not thinking, oh, I've got a typo there. You're thinking, all right, I'm trying to log out that variable that I just created. That variable I just created, oh, is not named right in my console log. So there are two ways of thinking about it. One is, what am I trying to get the computer to do? And if I can't tell you what the computer's trying to do, I can't figure out where it went wrong because I don't know what I'm trying to tell it to do. That's option one.
Right.
Option two is to now go back and reread that error message. Select movie is not defined. What do you mean it's not defined? I'm fucking defined it on line 41. Oh, it's not defined because I defined it as selected movie on line 41, not as select movie like I referenced it on 42. So two different ways to think about your debugging, but important to go through one of those two. And when one doesn't work, switch to trying the other.
Okay, yeah, I was just having a meltdown brain problem. It's been a day today. Thank you, Max. I appreciate
No
you.
problem. Shay, what's up?
Could you go over line 32 again, just to make sure I fully understand it?
Yes, the template literal.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you understand it up until the change that we made, or do you need a
Yeah,
full
it
overview?
was only until we changed it to option value and then you added
Okay.
the
Cool. So what we're putting in to display to the end user is the movie title, a dash, the $sign to show up, and the price itself. So what's happening is that is showing up. Great, no problem. The problem is that when they actually select one of these values, what's coming through the event target value is the movie title with the dash and the price information. Well, that information with the price in it doesn't line up with our object keys up here. So basically, when the user is selecting an option, we can't go back into the data and know what movie they selected, because that price information is muddying up the muddying up us going back and being able to pull that data back out. So instead, what we do is we say, hey, the value, which the end user isn't going to see, that's under the hood, instead of it being the title with the price information, just make the value be the movie title itself. That means that down here, when we get the event target value out, instead of it defaulting to whatever is between the option tags, instead it is going to just use the value here. And because it's just using the value here, we are able to go back into our object and get the movie data, which is actually pulling it in through here.
That made a lot more sense. Thank you.
Cool. Line 43, why does movie data selected data not work in this case, or selected movie, I'm sorry. That is because this and I'm going to give you 3 options. Okay. Actually, we're going to do this in reverse. What is line 45 saying? Line 45 is saying go to movies, which is the object, and go find the key called selected movie. So it comes up here and it goes Legally Blonde is not selected movie, Stars is not selected movie, Paul Blart is not selected movie, Citizen Kane is not selected movie. I don't know what selected movie you're talking about. Selected movie doesn't exist. So it says it's undefined. That and line 44 are the exact same thing. You're saying actually go find the key called selected movie. We don't want it to go find the key called selected movie. We want it to get out the event target value of whatever movie got selected, which in this case happens to be Legally Blonde. Then go find Legally Blonde from the movies. So if we put it in quotes or we use dot notation, it's not going to use the value of the variable of second movie. Instead, it is going to literally try and find the key called selected movie inside the object. The key selected movie inside the object doesn't exist. What does exist is Legally Blonde, which is the value of the variable called selected movie. So whenever we want our JavaScript to use the value of the variable, we have to use square braces without quotes. Whenever we want it to find the actual value of the string, that's when we either use quotes or dot notation. Does that answer your question? So lines 45 and 46 are synonymous. They are not synonymous with line 43. Basically, are we looking for the word selected movie, or are we looking for the value of selected movie, which happens to be coming from the event target value, which is trickling in through the value up here, which is being looped over the movies right here, which is coming from our keys up here. And you can go in reverse. Hey, for each one of these keys, loop over the movies, store that in the movie title, use the movie title as the value for the option, so that when the select changes, we can get the value from the event, store it in selected movie, see that the selected movie is Legally Blonde, use Legally Blonde to go back to our movies data to finally log out that information. Pachinko that all the way down, right? Follow that, make sure that you can trace it, either starting from the bottom and going up to the top, or starting at the top and going down to the bottom. Mo, what's up?
All right, so I redid it, and my movies are coming up as undefined still.
Okay.
The name is not showing next to the price.
Share your screen. Okay, script on change, event, selected movie, movie. Scroll down a little bit. Oh, sorry, you're sharing my code, not your code.
No, this is mine on the left.
The screen that we're seeing is definitely my code.
Oh, okay, my fault. Here we go.
And we would spend a very long time debugging my code to figure out why it wasn't working. Okay, this is definitely your code. Okay, so event target value, selected movie, movies, movie data. Okay, so I don't see anything wrong with your on change. Let's go up to your option where you add on the value of movie
Yeah, so
title.
that
Oh no, movie.
should not be moved. Oh, that I see where I messed up at.
That should just be movie title.
Yeah, that.
But I don't think that's going to cause your issue. Let me, well, test it. Save, see if it fixes it. I don't think it's
Yeah.
going to. Oh, it did? Cool.
Yeah, that was.
Good work.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anyone else need help?
Yeah, I'm experiencing the same thing too.
Okay. So oftentimes when we're working with our JavaScript, we don't actually want to start in the code. We want to start in our console. So do you have an error in your console?
It says line 42 says my console log is not defined.
Okay, so share screen, let's take a look. Now that we know it's on 42, it's probably an issue either on 41 or 42.
I think this is.
Yep, that looks like the right one. Okay, so let's go down to 42 and you are logging out selected movie,
Console
and you are console logging a dot log.
Oh my
You
god!
really
I
like to
didn't-
log
yo.
logs.
Yo, I didn't even see that. That's crazy. Thank you.
No problem. It's like you like to move it, but log it. All right, any other questions? Going once. Going twice. All right. Now we got into the fun part. So we're getting our movie data out. Now that we've done this work, that means that we can narrow in and just get out the price so that when we select one of these, the price shows up no matter which one we select. Okay, well, how is it doing that? What we're doing is we're using the value, which is the movie title. And once we get that value out, we're using that value as the key to go back up to our object. Now we're peeling the layers of the onion back. And because we've got the first layer of the object out, whatever the key is, we're getting back this whole object. Well, if we want to narrow in and get just the price information from that object, we can just say .price and use that key and get out only the information that we're looking for. Okay, that's really cool. But we've got this problem of we need the seats to show up. So in order to get the seats to show up, we could go headfirst into our JavaScript, but that's very, very data heavy. What I like to do first is to build the interface so I know what it's going to look like in my HTML. And if I can get it looking right in my HTML, oftentimes then and only then can I get into the data in my JavaScript and understand how I'm going to make it do that efficiently. So what I want to do is I want to build out my HTML interface so it's fully complete, and that will probably take us until the end of class tonight. And then tomorrow we can start thinking about what does the data structure look like to represent that HTML. So we're going to pump the brakes here a little bit. We're actually going to close out of our JavaScript. We're going to put our JavaScript on pause for tonight. We're going to take our style.css and we're going to throw that down at the bottom of the screen instead, just so we can reference it a little bit more easily. If you are someone who likes it split to the right instead of split to the left or split to the bottom, that is totally fine. You can split it that way. So I'm going to look at our final version. I've got my drop down here and I've got all of these different chairs showing up. Now I could go find an image of a chair and use that as my icon and use a bunch of different image tags. But I kind of like the idea of having icons instead of IMGs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head to my Google material icons. I'm going to pick the first option that comes up there. And I am going to do a search for my seat. And I get all these different options. You can pick whichever one you would like. I'm going to pick my chair. And then I'm going to, please pay attention, not use the variable icon font. I'm going to scroll down and use the static icon font instead. We specifically want the static icon font. I'm going to drop this link into the chat. In case, oh, that link did not copy well in Zoom. Okay, let me try it another way. That should work. Okay, so I do a search for my seat or a chair. I pick whichever icon I would like to use. I scroll down to my static icon font and I copy that link tag. I head back to my code, scroll up to the head, and above my link tag, I am going to paste in the Google Fonts link tag. Then I'm going to head back to Google Fonts. I'm going to copy under inserting the icon. I'm going to hit the copy button. I'm going to go down, and underneath my movie selection, I'm going to put in a div. And inside that div, I'm going to make another div and paste in my chair. Save, go back over to the browser. I'm going to explain there's double divs in a second. And what I should see is my first little chair. So again, two things that I copied from Google Fonts under static icon font. I copy this link tag. I come back over to my code. I paste that in above my link tag to my style sheet. I then go back to Google Fonts. I copy the span tag. I go back to my code. Underneath the select, I make two divs. Got to get my double divs going here. My first div, my second div, and then I paste in that first span tag. Does anyone not have a chair, one lonely chair showing up?
Yeah, mine didn't show up. I don't know why.
Share screen, take a look.
Never mind. I forgot to put two divs.
The two divs shouldn't cause the problem, but see if it fixes it. And if it doesn't, totally fine. Kenny, we're going to use two divs because we want one div, exactly, kind of rows and columns. We want one div to contain all of our seats, and then we want a separate div for each row of seats. Which will make more sense when we start duplicating them in a second. But essentially, rows and columns, you're not far off there. All right, anyone not
For
get...
some reason, I'm getting a weird thing with the I guess it's the word chair popping up, but the span tag didn't work almost.
So that's usually because you're missing your link tag up in the head. But if you think you have that, share your screen and let's take a look.
Yeah, I definitely do. Hold on.
And you pulled the link tag from static icon font, not variable,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, yeah. But I don't know.
Link. Okay, that looks okay. Scroll down a little. Scroll down a little bit to your chair. Oh, that looks fine too. Request remote. Zero symbols outline chair. Boom. One symbols outlined. Fill grad. Well, all of that looks right too. Sometimes it's, oh, sorry, I hit my microphone there. Hopefully that wasn't loud. Sometimes it's an issue when we add in a new link tag with the live server. So I'm gonna stop it and
Okay.
restart it. Any chance that fixed the problem?
Not at all. No. Yeah, it didn't change it. I don't know what I did. Or if I just try to take it out and then just re-put it in again.
Yeah, give that a try because I'm not seeing anything that's wrong in your code.
Okay.
Did anyone else have a problem with their chair not showing up?
Yeah, but I thought that would fix it, but no.
Yeah, I have the same issue as well.
Did someone get their chair to show up? Okay. I'm not sure. Your chair is not showing up. I really don't know what could. Oh, you guys had, Mo, can you share your screen again?
Yeah, hold on. There we go.
And let me request remote again. I notice on mine. Yeah, see, this is broken. So, switch me over to where you got the link.
Okay. Hold on.
I think we just found a bug at Google.
Let me put it into a different, I guess, a different page.
Yeah, that's fine.
There we go. Yeah, so I got it right here.
I think Google crapped the bed. So I'm gonna close this and oh, I'm gonna refresh.
Yeah, I did that several times too.
Nope. Okay. I'm going to explicitly tell it that I'm only searching for the chair. Mother fracker, why is it doing that?
Yeah, I even selected a couple different chairs and they still didn't show up after changing the span tag as well.
Let me close this. Okay, so here's that is so weird. Is that can't be the problem? Tell me, Google, that's not the problem. That is kind of the problem. Okay, so what you need to do for whoever's chair is not showing up, this is Google's problem and not your problem. Under, oh, maybe, will this, under customization, hit this little, like reset icon, this restart, reset, whatever. If you click that little icon, it should put your weight back to 400 and your optical size up to 48. So, and then it will gray out. You can't click the button again. Once you do that, click on the chair. If you don't see the options to change the weight and stuff, you have to close out right up here. So you close out, you hit this little reset icon. Then when you open up the chair and go back down to the static icon font, you'll notice at the end, it doesn't say NaN, which stands for not a number. It actually has the 48 in there. Copy that, replace that in your HTML with the link tag that you just copied, and then you should get a chair showing up.
Okay.
So you're cool. Google done broke. That fix it, Mo?
Give me 1 second here.
Yep.
It didn't for me.
Damn it, Corwin. Let me see if it fixes it for Mel,
Yeah,
and then I'll come.
it fixed it. It fixed
Okay.
it for me.
Corwin, go ahead, share screen.
Just me.
Just you, the problem child tonight. Okay, outlined, share. I don't see anything wrong with your link. It's literally just showing the word share in your HTML or in your browser.
Yeah, well, everything's showing up, but it's just not showing the icon of the seat itself. I don't know if you can still see my screen or not.
Stop your live share and restart it.
Okay.
Not your
shit.
your like the
Yeah, my live
port
share.
down at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your live server. That's the word I was going for.
Yeah, still nothing.
Share screen. Share your code again. Let me take a look. $48,400 0 is what should be at the end. Share your screen. Your code. It didn't go through.
Oh, my bad. All right, there we go.
48,400 0 rel style sheet, material symbols outlined. OPZ weight. Okay, so
he
now
got him in a div. He got the div inside the div. I know
there.
movie selection.
Your this needs to
Oh.
be outside the select.
Bruh, I didn't even realize that I put it inside of the select. My bad.
Thank you. I think that was
Appreciate
Shay,
you.
but thank you for that. Beat me to it.
Yo. I'm like, why is this not working?
All right. Anyone else need help? All right, we're gonna bang this home. Just gonna get all of our chairs to show up, and then we're gonna call it a night. So we've got one chair in here, but if I go back and I look, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chairs. And I also need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chairs down. So I'm going to copy my chair and I'm going to paste it 7 more times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I come back over here and I take a look. There will be, but not tonight. Okay, so I get my 7 or my 8 chairs in here and I copy this entire inner div. Not the outer div, the inner div. That's going to represent my row. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And if I save, I should get a grid of chairs. And if you don't, Command Z until you get back to having only one row or one chair and make sure what you're copying is only what you want to select. And yes, Kenny, that is exactly why we have 2 different divs, is to plan for the rows before we get to making them. Okay. Last thing I want to do now that I've got those in is my seats look so much nicer compared to these seats because this is just a giant grid. So what we could do is say, hey, go put an ID on each one of the 3rd seats in and the 7th seats in and make a little gap because I want a little aisle there. But now we need to go back through and find all those individual spans and add them. And that's going to be really sloppy. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way up to my outer div of all of the seats, and I'm going to put an ID on that of seats. And once I've got my seats, I'm going to go down to my CSS and say, hey, go find in my seats, there is, oh no, did I make a mistake? Stand by. In the seats, there is going to be a
Can you just do seats div as the?
in the seats, there is going to be a div, and inside that div, there is going to be a span tag. And what span tag I would like you to select is something called the nth child. Go find the third seat and add margin on the left of it of 20 pixels. Did not think that was going to work. Okay, what are we doing? We're saying go to the seats, only look for things in the div ID seats. Inside those seats, there's going to be a div tag. Go find that div tag and then go find the span inside that div. But we don't want that to apply to all of the span tags. We only want it to apply to the third span tag. Now that created my little aisle between the first two seats and the third seat. We can repeat that with our seats, div, span, nth child, and apply it to the seventh seat as well. Now we've got a gap between our first and our last seats. Now you may say, Max, why wouldn't you just use the span and apply it to the third span and the seventh span? Well, you'll look and you'll see that works in the browser. That doesn't cause any issues. But now you're working on your app and you decide to create some span tags. And all of a sudden, the third span tag you create randomly has this 20 pixels on the left of the margin, and you can't figure out why. We want to be very careful about using span nth child, because that is going to apply to the third span tag in any div in any code that you use anywhere. So instead, it's much better to be specific with your selectors and say this should only apply to the third and seventh span inside a div that is inside a element that has the ID of seats on it. So it is totally fine to just use the nth child. But if this app were to grow, we wouldn't want our CSS to apply to things that we didn't intend to initially select. So we get to be a little bit more verbose with our seats. Any questions on our nth child?
Max, could you go over that again?
Yep. So we're trying to get to this final version, right? So what we're trying to do is say, hey, go to the third seat and create a gap between the second seat and the third seat, so it looks like there's an aisle down the chairs, right? And then we also want to apply that to our seventh seat, make sure there's a little room to the left of it. Well, in our HTML, we could just write this, right? We could say, go find all the span tags and go find the third span tag and the seventh span tag and add the margin to it. Following so far? Okay, so we save that, we come over here, and that works fine. But the problem is we said whenever you find a span tag and there are 3 of them, go add, or whenever you find the third one, go add pixels to the left of it. Well, we could be somewhere else in our site, right? And we could say, we accept Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. Well, all of a sudden, because Visa, MasterCard, and Discover are separate span tags, Discover is going to have a gap on it between MasterCard and Discover. We're like, whoa, what just happened there? Well, we only want this to apply to spans inside a div that are inside the ID of seats. And so in order to do that, we say, go find seats, and inside seats, go find a div, and inside the div, only apply it to spans if it's the third span. We could write that more generically as anytime there is a span in the seats and it's the third span in the div, or the third span that it finds, go apply this, but it's better to be more specific, more targeted with our CSS and say, hey, only apply it to something with the ID of seats, go to the div inside of it, and then go only apply it to the third one and the seventh one. You could apply it to the second one and the sixth one and use margin right instead of margin left. That would accomplish the same exact thing.
Thank you, Matt.
No problem. If you have a gap between your seats, if you've got an aisle going on in your movie theater, go get out of here, go recharge, make sure you're ready for more of this tomorrow. Does not get any easier. Kenny, we're going to tackle selected seats in our JavaScript. We're not going to tackle that in our CSS. So hold off on that. That's going to be a whole feature that we have to implement tomorrow. Jillian, what's up?
I just had a quick question because I never quite understood this during Free Code Camp. What's the difference between nth child and nth of type, and what makes you decide when to use which?
Great question. Does anyone else have a question or not have their code working before I answer, Jillian?
I got a space at the top, but that's it. My bad.
I just want and child means just nested child. Like, is that what that means?
No, it's a little different. So let me show you. I'm just going to do this between here, and I'm going to do an ID of playground. And then I'm going to say I've got a div that says 1 and a span that says 2, and then a div that says 3. And I'm going to make in my playground those divs to display inline. Just so we can play around and see those numbers. So we got 1, 2, 3 showing up, right? And so if we want to select the div that has 3 in it, that is actually going to be nth child 2. The reason why it is, it is nth child 3. And so to prove that, if I go to my playground and I get my div of nth child and I say 3 and I make the color red on that, we get red 3. Okay, why is it selecting that? The nth child is 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Makes sense so far, right? Now, the alternative to that is go get my playground and go get my div of nth. What was the question again, Jillian?
Nth of type.
Nth of type. And I say nth of type. And here I'm going to say 2. And I make my color red again, and I get 3 as red. Well, why is it 2 here when it was 3 up here? Because this span doesn't count because it's not the same type of the div that I'm selecting.
Okay, so if it matters if the elements are different, but it doesn't matter if the elements are the same, basically?
Correct. So because the type that I'm selecting is specifically a div, it's going to ignore anything that isn't a div and only count the number of divs and then apply it to that. Compared to nth of child, which is basically going to say, I don't care what element is selected right here. I'm going to go up to the parent and realize that these three things are in it. And because these three things are in it, no matter what type they are, I'm going to apply it to whatever the third element is in this parent div.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question about that too. So I get the nth of type and why it selected the second one, but so you have to specify though, because there's two divs. So like, what if you didn't have div and you just did nth of type 2? What would you get?
Because it's a pseudo selector, the pseudo selector always has to be applied to something.
Okay.
So if you took this out, really, that's valid CSS? Apparently that works.
Okay. I'm like, I don't even know what's going on
What
here.
if you get rid of playground? Then what happens?
Ah, I see.
Right, because it's the second, it's gonna apply to the second type of any. So
because there's two divs, it shows on the second div.
1, 2, yeah, it's the second div, so it's gonna make red apply to everything inside of it. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I just wanted to be sure. All right.
I have never used a pseudo selector without a selector in front of it. That to me feels very dirty and very wrong, but apparently it is valid CSS.
Wait, but the thing about it is it would make every second type of every element that was doubled within something red though, right?
Correct. Yes. So I'm going to delete this because we don't want everything to be red. That was just a little example. So don't put that in your code. We're just playing around. You shouldn't have anything red. You shouldn't have any numbers, any of that. Corwin, glad you fixed it. Kenny, I already told you we're going to tackle selected seats tomorrow. Does anyone need help? If you have your aisle showing up, you are ready to walk it and you are ready to get out of here. Have a good night. No new stuff getting covered, but if you have questions, I'm happy to stick around for a minute or two and help you guys out.
Next.
Yes.
Alexa, mute. Yes, my drop down is not working on my page. Alexa does not. Hold on 1 second. Alexa, pause. Goodness. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen.
Share your screen, and Kenny, I'll come to you next for your issue. Okay, so first thing I notice is you've got problems. And I don't mean that personally. I mean that on line 4, it looks like. So go ahead and head back to your JavaScript. This is mine, not yours.
Oops. All right, there we go.
And line 4, look at what's going on with those quotes up at the top.
So I kind of wanted to emphasize per se friends. Maybe I should use the emphasize element on the movie title.
So instead, what you could do is you could put this in a single quote and this in a single quote, and then you can use your double quotes inside that string.
Okay.
And then bad grandpa, you're missing the comma before it. And then finally down here, you got a semicolon when it should be a comma. And an extra semicolon that you don't need. And when we save, Prettier Now runs and you should be good to go.
All right. Let's just take a quick look before you go.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yep. Kenny, go ahead, share your screen. Oh, never mind. Sorry. Good work. Anyone else need help? All right. Have a great evening. I'll see you guys tomorrow.